Varys is dead. That's the most important takeaway on which the rest of what we're talking about is founded. But there's much more than that. Random internet guy, if you would take out your headphones for a moment, because I don't want to spoil this for you.
Okay.
Specifically, we're talking about, my certainty that Varys is dead, but also that Varys is Lysono Maar, the Golden Company spymaster. And for good measure, you read it right. Varys, Lysono, Rugen the Jailer, maybe in some way what we might think of as a trans man. I'm Greg, aka Moon Man. I'm on the boat. RIG is back with his headphones in. Didn't want to spoil that. Today we're talking about all of that right now on YouTube, not on the Patreon. Don't worry, part 4 of Stannis That Peach in the Battle of Wind, the real theory for the theory heads, is in progress and will be out soonish. But for today, to help me talk about all that stuff I just said, is my friend Random Internet Guy, who has his headphones back on now and has a channel where he does Song of Ice and Fire videos, some of which we'll talk about in a bit, that I really like. But hey, say hi, Random.
Hey, everybody. I'm very excited. I'm very excited to get into this talk.
Yeah, if you haven't picked this up, I made RIG take his headphones off because he doesn't know he just knows I'm going to lay on him what I've described as a series of escalating Varys theories. And so that was the first one. Varys is dead. So I want to thank you actually, for agreeing to be here and be the audience surrogate in a way and reacting to my escalating Varys theories, holding my feet to the fire, scoffing, groaning if necessary. Yeah, well, exactly. Leveling questions in my direction when appropriate. And so, to start off, to give us a foundation there, like, let me ask you this, Ian, without necessarily endorsing one way or the other, unless you have strong feelings, like, what would you be able to characterize, like, what you think is the general, like, theory head assumption, if there is one, about where or how Varys shows up in the Winds of Winter?
Okay, so the general theory head assumption. So that's going to be a hard one for me because I think that people have a series of different ideas about where Varys is going to go. Varys, however you pronounce it. I was kind of strayed a little bit away from making too many straight predictions with him because I think that in the short term, I don't really know much about where he might be going. But long term, I feel like maybe I have a little bit of a handle on it. But I guess the one I'll put forward that I've seen that I felt some sort of attachment to is that he's potentially a Blackfire, and so I think that many people view him as supporting Daenerys and him appearing to support her, and that this has all been a big plan to get her on the throne. That's kind of the camp I disagree with. And then the other side would view him as pivotal in, using her and using other people. And so I'm like, if I had to split the camp into two, the theory heads kind of tend towards he's honest. He seriously is supporting the Daenerys cause, or he's a Blackfire. He is not seriously supporting the Daenerys cause, and he is using her and that cause.
Well, this everything you said, yeah, I mean, that's a good breakdown, but that's all sort of past tense from, like, the state of the story we're at now, the where we last see Varys in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons. So, like, future, I'm saying he's dead. I'm saying he's dead. So
yeah, I guess for me that's a difficult one. So, if we're going to talk about him being dead, interestingly enough, I would agree with you in a one sense. I would agree with you in like a metaphorical sense, I guess, or whatever. I think that he's no longer. I think he's casting off the role we've seen him play thus far. But in terms of physically, has the character we've seen on screen's heart stopped beating? I'm not 100% sold on that one.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah,
but where he comes back is a mystery. That's a difficult one for me, and I would be curious to hear your opinion on whether he's even still in Westeros or not. Some people have pitched the idea that he'll jump ship and more or less follow people over back to Essos.
Yeah, well, so I have thoughts on exactly this. So, of course, yeah, when I'm saying Varys is dead, what I mean is the persona of Varys the Spider. he's dead, like deader than dead, probably never to return, certainly not publicly. And obviously, that can't be a new observation. But yeah, and part of it is that when people talk about the future of the story, it probably is simpler to just say Varys. When even if if pressed on it, you would say, oh well, Varys by whatever disguise he shows up in or whatever form. But I do think in some discussions and some predictions about the future, I do think sometimes there is an assumption possibly where like, well, we'll see Varys because, in a way, there is a logic to that in that if Varys has, as he put together and he eventually sort of announces directly to Kevin as he's murdering him, he's an agent of Targaryen restoration, putting the apparent son of Rhaegar on the throne. So you can imagine he would show up again in connection with that cause, with that operation. But
yeah, showing up in Aegon's court was where I saw him coming up next.
Yeah.
I guess most likely, but I don't know if George would throw us something that direct where he'd just crop up and be next to Aegon all of a sudden one day
as Varys.
Yeah.
I think definitely not. I think Varys is extremely dead. Whoever, and so I think if you're really gonna get into talking about Varys in the past and certainly the future, you do at some level have to divorce the concept of this person from the persona of Varys. We can call him the Mummer spymaster, the Mummer double agent. At least that's his function as Varys, right? But he wasn't always Varys. Varys is, what we know about him. This figure is he is someone who takes on personas, right? We know one other persona with a name, at least, Rugen the Jailer, who he clocks in occasionally as probably other personas. Some of the ways he shows up in various points, you could look at it and say, oh, he is actually dressed as, he is doing Rugen the Jailer here, but other times maybe he's doing some other lowborn persona in some of the other disguises he shows up as, who's not as, who's different. Whatever, you could figure that out if you wanted to. But he's a man of many personas, and Varys is one of them. So he wasn't always Varys. That is sort of a baseline assumption I would think we'd have to take, yeah?
So I guess something I would ask is there a personality or a character or a person who he considers to be his true self, or their true self or whatever? I don't know how he thinks of himself or whatnot, but that would be my question.
That's a very interesting question.
Is there a character that this character actually believes themselves to fundamentally be?
Right.
And if not, what does that say about them? But if so, are we going to see that character in Aegon's court, or are we not going to see that character ever?
Yeah.
So, that's why I would maybe ask about it.
Yeah. I think those are exactly the questions that I'm interested in talking about. Was he, whoever he was when he was born, before he started taking on personas, and will he ever be able to and then choose to adopt a persona that he wants to? And you would get into questions of like, well, what would that even mean, right? So
yeah, to me another one to ask on top of that would be, does Varys consider Varys to be dead? Like, for example, is he one of those characters who's like, oh, the me who I was is dead and I'm nobody now? Is he, I don't want to say doing a faceless man because of the faceless men, but is he doing a faceless man psychologically on himself?
Yeah, another figure in a different way doing something that is similar to, all these the changing identities.
Nobody? Is he secretly nobody, and does he secretly think of himself as nobody or something like that? And then the flip side of that coin would say that maybe he's really a distinct personality of a Blackfire, and Varys considers himself to be a Blackfire prince in disguise, in waiting, a secret one in hiding.
Oh, perhaps to claim the throne.
Not for himself, but for his family. Like, I see that was what really resonated with me with the Alt Shift X video. If you ever watched the Alt Shift X Blackfire video,
on Varys, yeah,
Yeah, and he talks about like, wouldn't the story make a ton of sense if everything he was doing was out of like love and for his family? And I'm like, maybe some of these angles we can push back on, but I do think that falls in line with the general, and this does seem to be true, kind of premise of Martin's in the heart and conflict. Characters have to have some sort of deep personal conflicting motivation. They can't just be doing things because they're evil or they're schemers. They're evil or they're schemers for a reason, you know? And so it's like, I like that idea. And I think that that's something that we deal with Varys, is that Varys in theory should have a human self and a human motivation, you know?
Like I agree. And I mean, that tends to be how I see Varys. I buy him. I buy his commitment that he sort of sells to Kevin, you know. But that's a whole longer story. But what I want to get into though is that I think we can say that the persona of Varys is dead and gone, and never to return, or only under extremely specific circumstances. You know, he does. I think probably when he when he helped Tyrion escape, I think he probably figured the Varys persona was dead then, and you know, makes an exception and pulls it out, just, you know, to make a connection with Kevin there.
Yeah, I would agree.
Reasons.
I think he's presenting a character that Kevin knows, as opposed to just pulling out somebody that Kevin's like, "Who are you again?"
yeah. So I think Varys is dead. I think that for the same reason I think basically everything. Of course, the politics. You might be aware I'm engaged in a political reanalysis of the Song of Ice and Fire from the ground up. It's sort of how I look at the story. So I ask, like, who is Varys? This persona. He's a Free Cities cell spy, an intelligence contractor. Himself and Illyrio Mopatis. He gets recruited by Aerys II to be his master of whispers. I would say from the beginning it's a longer story, but we know that at some point he's working as a mummer double agent, and at some point that project that he's working on is to put the Aegon, the apparent son of Rhaegar, Aegon the VI, on the throne. But this project he's engaged in, right, is not part of the public persona of Varys. Obviously, that's a secret, you know, scheme he's running. Some people know that. John Connington knows that. Knows it's Varys that is involved in this plot, specifically by name. Kevin learns this before his death, and there's some other people who know this, but there's also no reason to change the fact that nobody right now knows that Varys is like working for Aegon's cause this whole time. He tells Tyrion in Tyrion 2, A Clash of Kings, spies and informers are seldom loved, my lord. Varys is like a hated and mistrusted figure. He's the perfect sort of scheming counselor that's, you know, distrusted for obvious reasons, and like, you know, would be like an easily hated figure in any court. And you can see that he is. Barristan, you know, puts at his feet the turn in Aerys II's court. He pins that on Varys' arrival. Stannis says he, you know, tried to convince Robert to clean house and get rid of Varys first of all when Robert came to power, and that makes sense. Like, you should do that. You know, you're overturning a system, a dynasty, and replacing it. You should clean house of suspicious characters who aren't your people. You know, but if anything, it's like a testament to Robert's.
Yeah, Varys, I would say he clings on like a lot of the Tsarist officers cling on. Well, we'd really love to kick you out, but we just really can't quite do it without you.
Yeah, he makes himself.
He has a service that's highly necessary in that Robert needs more or less a spy apparatus, given his tenuous position. He doesn't sit comfortably. So he needs that person, and that old regime intellectual capital really carries all the connections. Like, you know, like it's difficult to ditch I mean, Russia Today utilizes the same apparatus and intelligence that the Soviets built. I mean, like, why would you ditch that? Because, and then of course Putin has made those people incredibly powerful. That's a very different conversation. But the point is the same: is that infrastructure that Varys has is indispensable to Robert's regime because his power is not certain. So,
replacing it would take an enormous amount of work. And
so you want to, you should kick him out, and you should kick him out, and you want to kick him out, but can you kick him out? Yeah. Is the question. Can you get rid of him?
It's difficult. Exactly. He makes himself, he also could have left, right? It would make sense. Yeah. He could have obviously snuck out, but he said, I have a chance here to stay in this position, and if I can go have like an interview with Robert right now and like sell him, bring him some things, and it works. He stays in and is able to act as a double agent from within the Red Keep and the Small Council.
I think he talks about this briefly too. He talks about how he feeds. I mean, it's a Tyrion, not just a Tyrion. He talks to somebody about how he feeds everybody just enough information where they find him to be indispensable. Mm-hmm, and then he withholds whatever he needs to make sure everyone's actually running to his tune.
Yeah, exactly. To keep himself alive, he says. Because
buy his life anew each day or whatever he says.
Yeah, exactly. Which is funny when you realize, like, well, he could actually leave at any time. He could sneak out at any time. So he's choosing to buy his life this way, but what he is buying his position as a double agent for his cause, So, I would also say, so the next thing I would say, like, when we think about Aegon coming to power, which I think is happening to one degree or another, is that Robert's Rebellion is this is something that is a important point to the Battle of Wind theory, but Robert's Rebellion is not a fit example for that Targaryen restoration. They should be looking at doing this in different ways and not emulating Robert's Rebellion. And there's really just there's not a lot of reason for Varys to be kept around in an Aegon court. The real point I'm making is he's like a very spent force politically. Has a history in both the reign of the last Targaryen king who brought down the dynasty in mismanagement and catastrophe and weakness. He is a figure probably more and more hated, but in the uninspiring, at the least uninspiring and ineffectual reign of Robert that has also collapsed in a succession crisis. Like, there's lots to blame him. He's an easy figure of blame. This is part of what he's telling Tyrion, right?
He's a toxic asset. He's pissed off too many people, and he's been there for too many downfalls of too many kings.
Yeah, exactly. So even if he has an in with a new Targaryen king under a restoration of the Targaryen dynasty, who also actually knows him thinks of him as being involved in this plot. So, like, Aegon knows it's Varys. And he believes at least that it's Varys who literally got him out of the Red Keep and is one of the principal architects of this whole plan to bring him back to power. So he has an in there, but there's nonetheless no reason for that throne to keep him around. Like you said, a toxic asset they just need to get rid of.
I would definitely agree that there's no reason for Aegon to keep him around as is. I would potentially see Aegon keeping him around as somebody else or as a shadow advisor. I mean, like, I don't necessarily know where it would be, but who's to say he doesn't just get sent, in theory, back to Pentos to live in some form of opulence, and he just writes letters to the Red Keep on a semi-regular basis and conducts some shadow affairs, more or less, from a distance, But I don't know. That's kind of uncertain. I don't know if he himself would go for that. I feel like that's like a thing that's going to be the downfall of a lot of characters in the series is like their inability to just like stop doing what they're used to doing.
Yeah.
That's a simplistic way of putting it, but I'm like, could Varys actually stop being a Varys? I don't know about that one.
Yeah, well, that I think not. I think he wouldn't want to be. I think he's worked for decades, like as a double agent and an architect of this Targaryen restoration plan and whatever he was doing before that. That's a story for another day. But no, I think he wants to stay involved, doesn't he? And he has an in. He is one of the architects of this. So, like, he presumably, palace intrigue aside, as a starting point, he should have a place in that court in some way, the ear of the king, right? And yet, I think we both agree, Varys the spider is no use to anyone.
Yeah.
Like, it's a persona he's maintained because it's a job it's a reputation that was built as a information dealer, and that got him a job in the Red Keep, and that he's held on, but like it has no value anymore. He's also implicated in the murder of Tywin and King Joffrey, which even if you're on the if a new team comes in, like it's still anyway, he's toxic. So, and yet I think we also both agree, like, he would want to be around. And so that tells me, and we also know he's a man, whoever this figure is, this mummer, the mummer spy, he is a figure of changeable personas.
Yeah.
So that says to me that we should be looking for Varys, the mummer formerly known as Varys, to show up in the Winds of Winter as someone else.
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. My question on top of that, or my thing to look for on top of that, or to ask about, would then be to try to narrow down where he is likely to pop up. Because I think at Aegon's court is the first answer, but it also makes me wonder if not, or if he would not maybe pop up somewhere else in order to ensure that Aegon's mission is successful. I don't know where that would be, but it would not surprise me to see him lurking in the background of somewhere that wasn't Aegon's court.
Yeah, like moving on to another mission. Like he's been in this mission. I mean, yeah, I think anything's possible. It puts me in mind of how I first found your channel. I believe was your Game for Two Players series, which I loved. Which is, if as the name suggests, it's about Varys and Illyrio and their plans. This long plan, whatever it is, that involves presumably Targaryen restoration. They're working Viserys and Dany. They're working young Prince Aegon, or whoever he is, and Varys is part of that, is as one of its architects, seemingly, but also as a double agent in the Red Keep. And you go through a lot of stuff in that. There's just so many questions, and I just recall it really helping me think about a lot of questions around those plans as I was formulating the Battle of Wind stuff. Most of that stuff has only just barely started to appear in part 3. The getting into that whole plan is for a later episode, but it's a great series. We'll link it somewhere, maybe on your screen now, maybe at the end, unless RIG would rather I link something else.
Oh no, yeah, watch the Varys series. I would say it's definitely interesting. I didn't think I had that much to contribute to the conversation in that series, so I tried to look at places where people were talking about it, and I tried to look at kind of what made sense to me, and then to wiggle it all together into something. But the big thing that was looking at, that I think that people ask about a lot, is the connection. People always want to ask about everybody's connection to magic, and weirdly enough, I think Varys is one of the few characters that actually might know a little bit more about that than other characters. And Preston was kind of the one who put that forward, in his series about the House of Black and White. But the thing that convinced me about it was that George writes so heavily in the Dunk and Egg series about House Blackfire, and that Bloodraven in that series is so well known as this really powerful magician. And so I'm like, if you're actually a Blackfire and you really support House Blackfire, you're going to be a wizard fighter. You're just like, you're going to consider yourself to be opposed to like an arch wizard, and you're not going to think like regular people, because you're going to, others might think that's you're paranoid or whatever, but in your house's lore, your house and your family has been murdered and thwarted several times by an actual magic wizard man that's probably not dead.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of people in the story have very little, grasp or connection on what's really happening. I would say on the more, I don't necessarily even use the word magic. I like the teak thing better. But on the magical level, if you want to call it the magical level. And so like that was the thing that I really just couldn't get away from the Varys series. And so my big questions going forward for him are going to be about whether or not that's true. And if there is going to be some crash course intersection between Aegon's story and Bran's story. And of course, like if you follow Preston's thing, then Jock and Hagar would be like the linchpin there. Mm-hmm. So it gets a little outlandish, but at the same time, it would tie up a bunch of otherwise seemingly unconnected threads. Like you've read the Dunk and Egg books, right? So there's a lot of House Blackfire in those ones. Oh, yeah, it's rather surprising how super duper important House Blackfire is in those books.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I think about going forward with Varys is, if those two stories might intersect, but I don't know how much direct Varys interaction there'd be in terms of overseeing that. But again, it makes me question if he's going to end up in somebody's story further north than we expect him.
Interesting. Well, like part of what is interesting me today is really like a step to wrapping our heads around that. If we're going to try and predict any of that, I think is really coming to terms with it not being Varys, right? Like it's so I think he's dead. That's never coming back. And so when I say look for him to pop up, I don't mean him to pop up and like winking and saying like, haha.
Oh no,
yeah, Varys,
like a shadow.
So it's just not going to be. It's going to be just somebody.
Yeah,
no,
I would
somebody,
agree with that.
Right? Like that's how would that be presented? It would just be a character shows up, and does anybody confront him on it? Does anybody figure it out? Well, maybe someday, maybe not. I would guess like he'd find a way for that not to happen, both the character and the author, for at least a long time until some crisis moment.
I think George might leave us a tell here, right? So when we see, and I think it's Rugen, he makes particular note about the way Rugen smells. And I know George is very descriptive, but I feel like he spends an extra drop of salt to let us know that the wine he smells like is sour. It's not that Rugen smells like a drunk. It's that Rugen smells like sour wine. Like maybe he's poured it on himself a little bit to make himself smell like bad wine. So this to me is maybe a Varys trick that we might look for. So for example, if a character shows up, because heavy perfume, right? Heavy perfume is a Varys thing. I think the olfactory, I think it's the word, the olfactory senses is going to be what trips us off to any sort of disguised character. We'll see somebody and they'll reek of lemon spiced ale. And you'll be like, and every time we see them, they'll reek of lemon spiced ale. And then we'll be like, oh, it's Varys in disguise. That's why he insert olfactory response here every scene we see him, Because it seems to be that way. And maybe I'd have to go back and check every listing, but the way he smells is pretty important to him. And I believe this ties into Arya, because Arya has her sight taken away, right? So she's told to rely on what do people sound like, and what do people smell like, and what does stuff feel like. And so we get
see through the disguises.
Yeah, we get a bunch of those with Varys, with a bunch of his disguises. Remember when he's first introduced with Illyrio and he's dressed like a guard, his boots make a particular scrapida on the ground, and she picks up on this pattern. And so I think that would be how we find him, if that makes sense. If assuming that this is a true theory and that we are going to catch a Varys out of the shadows, he's not just stabbing people and flittering off into nowhere with his little birds and stuff, right? I think that we're going to be clued into it by a series of smells and sounds and textures, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely like that, and I definitely think that could be true. I wish I could say that my proposal was along those lines, but when I said like find him in the winds of winter, what I meant was find him after he disappears, which is at the end of A Storm of Swords.
Okay.
And
so you think
I'm pretty sure he shows up in A Dance with Dragons.
You think he's around already and that we've already seen him? Well, I'd be curious. Do you have a particular section that you want to point to or a particular character that you want to point at?
So Varys is gone, but he's still part of this plan. He's one of its architects. He's one of its key members, and he's committed to it. He's going to be involved. He, deserves to be involved, even if John Connington has it out for him and doesn't want him to be involved. I don't think John Connington's going to get a lot of things. That right there is enough reason for Varys to not appear as Varys, because he's smart enough to know that John Connington despises him and is not going to want him around. But John Connington hasn't seen him in a
good deal of years,
like 6-7 years.
It's been a while.
And by my estimation, that's a bit convoluted, but so basically this is, but this thing, whatever it is the Blackfires have come up for whatever reason. I have my theories that I'm not ready to talk about totally. This is a Blackfire plot. It is a plot of the Golden Company. It always has been. I mean, that's something that takes a little more detail to get into, but like that's pretty clear in The Lost Lord alone. They've all I mean, the start of at least the Aegon, the baby Aegon specific portion of the plot begins in a negotiation between Varys Connington and Miles Toyne, head of the
Golden Company,
the Golden Company at the time. So this is a Blackfire Golden Company plot. Aegon is invading, so I'm pretty sure we should look for Varys. Again, he could be anywhere, but I think where he would want to be, and thus where we should look for him, is with Aegon or the Golden Company as part of that invasion. His talents, aside from political theory and strategic planning, is spying. And so I think we should look for him to turn up in some position of power in Aegon's new regime, in a place to leverage those things, at least to some degree. I think we should look for him in the place of the Golden Company's gender-bending spymaster, Lysono Maar. Lysono Maar is Varys.
So this was exactly what I was just about to say. Are you going to say Lysono Maar?
Well, we got. I proposed this in a comment somewhere that on one of your videos or someone else's that, or maybe it was some other thread that you had responded to. But so I was worried I had tipped you off, but you seem to have.
This is one I've heard before. This is actually one that I have encountered. I've encountered this one, and the only thing that would put me off about it, and I'd have to go look because I'm off the top of my head, I couldn't remember. Is I thought that Lysono Maar was described as pretty drastically physically different and a little younger than Varys would be, and not that Varys couldn't, especially within several months, couldn't change his form and figure a little bit.
Yeah, an actor lose a bunch of weight.
I would love to see a comparative description. When you looked at those two characters, was there anything about the comparative description that made you go, "This is a dead ringer"? It's got to be Varys, because they do come across very similar in a lot of regards. And I think they're both described as very perfumed.
It's so well. What made me think of it is when in The Lost Lord is his introduction. John Connington comes into the tent, having just been thinking about Varys and how much he hates him and wants to kill him, and then he steps into the tent and he meets the captains. And, he thinks to himself, and they've all got names that he's talking about. There's bastard names from the Seven Kingdoms. There's lordly names from the Seven Kingdoms. Who knows which of them is real? In the Free Companies, he thinks to himself, A man could call himself whatever he chose. And among these captains, upon his return after 12 years in hiding, having, not been to the Golden Company in 12 years, he meets all the captains, and among them, the spymaster was new to Griff, a Lyseni named Lysono Maar, with lilac eyes and white gold hair and lips that would have been the envy of a whore. At first glance, Griff had almost taken him for a woman. His fingernails were painted purple, his earlobes dripped with pearls and amethysts. So now there's more physical description of him in a later Ariane preview chapter from Winds of Winter. But
yeah.
But the first time I read that, I thought, hang on, the Golden Company spymaster, so the spymaster of the operation that's putting Aegon on the throne, which we already, at this point, it's that we have met Griff because Tyrion has been sent to him by Varys. And I'm thinking, like, they have a gender-bending spymaster as well. That's interesting. So that's the first tip-off. And then you start asking questions. Okay, so yeah, I think Varys has turned in his slippers and become the flamboyant Lysono Maar. And they're both Lyseni, or Varys's alter ego. That alter ego is a Lyseni. Now you can ask questions about that, like, was that person, was the mummer spy really from Lys originally, or is that part of the persona? Could there be reasons for it? Certainly. One, as we've alluded to here, like, one theory about Varys is that he is by blood, has some Targaryen heritage because he has some Blackfire heritage. And if you had lilac eyes, which we don't know about Varys because it's never been mentioned, you might, people, even right before A Clash of Kings came out, people started theorizing, like, oh, wait a minute, is Varys a Targaryen because of Egg shaving his head to hide that he's a Targaryen? And so people started thinking, and then you looked, and sure enough, in all these books, Varys' eye color is like one of the only eye colors that never come out. So, but there's this possibility that he does have lilac eyes, and that he's been hiding his Targaryen heritage. One reason you might choose to call yourself a Lyseni and take on a Lyseni accent, if you're hiding your Targaryen look, your heritage, would be for that. You would, so that the first thing people hear about you or hear in your voice is that you're a Lyseni. A lot of Lysenis have this Valyrian look to them. So that answers that question, right? It answers it about Varys, if it is indeed true. It answers it about Lysono Maar. Doesn't mean either of them or the one of them are not from Lys, but it's a possibility. So beyond that, like I said, like, the thing that tipped me off is they both inhabit this space of liminal gender, which, on the case of Varys, that he's a eunuch, that he's been mutilated, robbed of everything down there, or at least that is how that alter ego tells it. We don't really know if that's true, but that is his presentation of it. He presents as a eunuch. Everyone knows him as a eunuch. And what goes with that is he has an effeminate, mincing presentation of gender. He wears silk and damask robes of, in lilacs and yellows, like he's a grandma dressing up for Easter, and he smells like it too. He smells like potpourri, and he powders his hands. He's basically your grandma, but in the form of a kind of a pudgy little bald man. And on the other hand, Lysono, in the details, doesn't match any of that. But Griff looks at him and clocks him as a woman for a split second. And then he sees, like, oh, well, he's got something about his lips. Does that mean he's wearing lipstick? Earrings? He's got earrings that seem to be associated with that, which is confusing because you might think, well, like, why doesn't he clock him as just wearing earrings in a piratey way? He's described already how they're all wearing lots of jewelry to have for their personal wealth, all their gold bands, but rings, necklaces. They're wearing all this gold and gems on their body, and yet he clocks the earrings, the dangly earrings of amethyst, as being
and pearls,
as attaching
being
pearls and
effeminate.
amethysts as being part of why, or he's at least associating them with why he clocked him as
he thinks it's
a woman.
It's like effeminate jewelry. He thinks it's like an effeminate look.
Yeah.
My question would be: so I took the lips thing as to be a pouty lips thing, like a plump, rich, full lips thing, because I noticed that George seems to talk about that to a pretty big extent. Several women he tries to describe as attractive are often described because of the poutiness, the fullness of their lips. And so that was something where now I'm super curious to know if anyone ever described Varys' lips.
Yeah. Right. I did not look into that.
I want to know the comparison now. I'm super curious. Because if we missed one, if there's a description of Varys is blah 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 with his lush pouty lips, then now I'm going to feel like a fool and be like, oh shit, we saw it the whole time. It was right there. He's like Lysono Maar.
I didn't look for it, partly because I couldn't decide. Is he talking about his lips anatomically, or is he saying he has garish lipstick on? Which is
I don't know.
It could be either. Like he has it could be either. We don't know. And so so he's described as looking like a woman, as being clocked by Connington as a woman, and then later he's described as a woman, as looking like a woman again in the Arianne 2 sample chapter by himself, not by Arianne, but by himself. We'll get to that quote in a bit. But he's described as having a waterfall of hair. Of course, that suggests long hair. We'll get to the timeline, but probably not long enough to grow a waterfall of hair. But of course, this is Varys, the mummer we're talking about.
A wig. I'd be guessing an impressive wig.
Right. Easy enough to imagine a wig. The shaved bald head is, referred to as the mummer's cut in the Arya chapters in Bravos, for its use with wigs. And it is a half a year later, though, from when he disappears, from when Tyrone is killed and Tyrion escapes, to when Connington and Aegon show up meet up with the Golden Company and meet Lysono Maar.
Yeah.
It is 5 to 6 months later. Okay, now more about Lysono Maar. He is a bit of a mummer himself. Like, the name strikes me as immediate. I feel like I'm immediately supposed to clock that as a nom de guerre. It sounds like he's a Lyseni named Lysono Maar, right? It sounds like an Arabic style nom de guerre, like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, like your name is, part of your name is guy from this town, because it's a nom de guerre. So this is the guy from Lys, and then Maar. Now this is really reaching, but it is just interesting. Obviously, like my Latinate mind makes me think the sea, this Maar, but nonetheless makes me think of the Latin mare and our use of it in other languages. Maar meaning the sea, and take that for what you will. If you want to tie that into people, all the little connections people have found with Varys and water. That's
it's proof he's a merman.
Right. Well, but there's those weird little things that people add up to, like, what does this mean? That he doesn't mean he's a merman? Like when he says to Tyrion, if you throw me overboard, you'll be disappointed in the results. What does that mean? He comes from the sea. Well, there's, Valyrian is not Latin, but nonetheless.
I'll say my next April Fool's theory will be that he's secretly a manderly. He's secretly a merman. No, but no, I think that I think there could be something there. I also think that it being a name that's I would say Lysono to me, and maybe I'm mistaking this, almost seems like a name that might be a common Lyseni name, like kind of one that you don't question, because for the reason you said, it's a name that derides where you're from. So he's a guy from Lys named Maar. Probably a lot of them, probably a fuck ton of those out there.
Yeah, right. And he is a spymaster. He is a spy. Either way, it's kind of sounds like a fake name, right? It's like the John Smith of guys from Lys, right?
It does make you sniff a little bit. You go like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Okay. Still on the aquatic thing. He says when talking about, like, he's the one who says, like, we can't get passage to Slaver's Bay. He says, "Can we walk across the waves, sir?" asked Lysono Maar. "I tell you again, we cannot reach the Silver Queen by sea." So he's talking about walking on water. Again, if you go back to, like, all those things people have found, starting with that, like, you'd be disappointed if you threw me overboard and what would happen. Talking about walking on water. That's, again, this stuff is reaching. I'm just putting that in there because it's fun. And if there is anything to that consciously on George's part about Varys and
let's call it undercurrents of water talk.
then it would make sense that he puts it in here. But again, back to, this is all about him being a bit of a mummer. When talking about how he got this intelligence of how there's no passage to Slaver's Bay, he says, "I slipped into Volantis myself, posing as a trader, to learn how many ships might be available to us." So he's already saying that the spymaster is already saying, I'm a disguise guy.
Yeah, I'm a mummer. He's already admitting it.
Mm-hmm. No surprise for a master of whispers. It doesn't confirm anything. If anything, like, this is Varys hiding in plain sight, because he's showing up as Aegon's master of whispers effectively. But I actually like it for that reason. I think, again, like, the fake name, him having a fake name, again, it fits a spymaster very much. It's like, don't ask about my backstory. I don't have one, buddy. You don't want to know. You don't care. You're not going to find out.
Yeah.
The other thing is, so about him then, is the question is, like, well, when does he become? When does he join the company? And when does he become the spymaster? Because Connington specifically calls out that he is not known to him. Now, he hasn't been at the Golden Company for 12 years, but so there's some possibilities here. Either Lysono Maar, it's a big company. Maybe he never ran into Connington. He is flamboyant. Maybe he'd be memorable, but also easy enough that he just joined the company after Connington left. At some point, has been elevated to spymaster, which makes perfect sense. But what I'm saying, of course, is that that's not the case. I'm saying that the mummer spy has been gone from the continent of Essos for like 30 years and has shown up sometime in the last 5 months as Lysono Maar and been made the spymaster. And this is when this is one of the timing is the thing that gets floated. The times I've floated this here and there in places, what the pushback I get the most is timing. But this, for example, makes perfect sense to me. Like, if he's Varys, this whole plot, what Varys is doing there is working as a double agent for the Golden Company. Now, I can see, like, that seems pretty clear to me. There's more to that. Like, you can ask when, putting my cards on the table. My prejudice is that, like, he's always been Golden Company. I buy the Blackfire connections of Varys. He's always been Golden Company. He's always been Blackfire cause, So, but either way, he's clearly been all this time working as a highly placed, important double agent for the Golden Company. So he shows up. A few people know who he is right away. The people in the know about the deep, big plan here, and they come out and say, whoever their spymaster was at the time, they say, maybe that guy probably knows that what Varys has been doing, whoever that is. Maybe not. Maybe they keep these spying operations separate. Who knows? But they would say, like, okay, this is, oh, you're wondering who our new spymaster is? You lower ranked captains? Well, you don't need to know. All you need to know is if you feel like he's new to you, but he's been a spy for the Golden Company for decades. And he's one of our oldest and most important members of the company. And he's returned to us now on the eve of our He's closed down the operation he's been working and has returned to us now on the eve of our big important operation, the one where we're going home to Westeros, and then everybody else, don't ask, none of your business who the spymaster is,
Yeah, I almost feel like it's something that would easily be passed off on most people. Like, it would be a matter that would be decided by such high echelon of Golden Company leadership, if not just simply dictated by the leader of the Golden Company directly. I feel like, it'd be pretty easy simply to just say, that's the spymaster. We just don't ask questions,
Yeah.
And then many people, if they are truly in the know, and the passages, particularly the ones I use in the video, kind of tend me to lean towards this direction, that many of the people who actually have golden armbands, who are lifetime committed members of the Golden Company, they understand, and they would just, they might even know who it is.
I think a number would.
They might even just know who he is, and they have a lifetime stake in this. They have all the armbands. If you have a dozen armbands, that's your whole life that you've put into this thing. And many of them have more than that. They have like 20 armbands. Like these guys are career members, and their entire existence is going to rise or fall with whether or not this company succeeds in Westeros. If it succeeds, they're lords. If it fails, they're dead.
Those are the stakes. That's the lifetime, and it's also a political cause with a bit of an ideology that you can tease out too. Yeah. So, it's a serious operation. Yeah, I think a number of people would know right away. A few other people who know enough would be able to go, "Hey, wait a minute! I heard. Oh, we've had a spy somewhere in Westeros running this operation for the last many years. Oh, Varys the Spider disappeared. I'm hearing, and our spymaster showed up. Some clever people would be able to put it together. People had never met Varys before, but they, if people in the know about things, but you wouldn't talk about it. Okay. Another thing he says at the meeting in The Lost Lord, when Strickland is complaining about young Aegon's plan to forget about Dany and just go, he's saying like, well, we need her dragons and her Unsullied, we don't have the numbers to do this. And this line is uttered. The first Aegon took Westeros without eunuchs, said Lysono Maar. Why shouldn't the sixth Aegon do the same? So here is Lysono, invoking the concept of eunuchs, first of all, by that name. They're just referred to as the Unsullied before that. Saying the eunuchs aren't coming with Aegon, which is to say, for anyone in the know, in a way, to us, the reader anyway, saying Varys is not coming along. Don't look for Varys here. Yeah. We're doing this without eunuchs. To me, that seems very pointed.
Another thing that would say to me, what that screams to me right away is way outsized influence at the table. You're the what? The head of what? The spymaster has been here for 5 months, and you're opening your mouth in this conversation to dictate what we should do? That indicates to us, the reader, that at least if this theory is true, that would indicate to us, the reader, that you are a little more important than you're letting on. And that's the part that sticks out to me. That is a bit above his pay grade, it almost seems like.
Well, who knows how the Golden Company works, like what it's, but you're correct. I think that impression is correct, because it's mostly a conversation between Connington and Harry Strickland, but a few people weigh in, like directly, including contradicting Harry Strickland. And Lysono Maar is one of like the 2 or 3 who do that. And he says quite a bit.
Well, to your statement, how does the Golden Company work? I would have to go back and read it again, but we do have a bit of structure there. The Golden Company, is built on a system that involves loyalty to a high degree, because you can more or less, with your lifetime buy-in, purchase a name in Westeros. A lot of these guys they bring up that they are not Westerosian descent, but they have taken a name, and they have taken a ton of armbands. And so it seems like it's a little bit of hybrid. A lot of these people are legitimately related one way or another, like the Fossaway guy, he was the descendant of more or less sexual assault, and so he claims the name Fossaway because of that. because he has the same blood, but many of them don't. And so, but they still have names. And what binds them to the company seems to be all those armbands. And that's why I'm like, the company does seem to have its very particular way of functioning. And it when
those
one instance involves, well, now
those are tokens for the castle machine. Later on down the road.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah,
you take your armbands off and you put them in the castle vendor.
Yeah, you know? And then you get a fief, and you get power, and you get control in this system that you're going to usurp. And so they're buying in with their loyalty, but that part of that buy-in is to also buy into that structure. The Blackfire is like, we're not ditching that we are Blackfire Incorporated and you are going to take a job position that has Blackfire in your title, right, or something like that, you know, like but we'll let people who are not actually part of the structure into it in order to maintain this structure overall. So I would say it's like, that to me it would say that Lysono Maar should have almost no pull within the Blackfire institution because he has no stake, he has no buy-in, unless which is I think that is very supportive of your theory, just that one incident, because he should have not no voice, but he should have a voice when he's spoken to, and basically not any other time. But he seems to have pretty deep voice, you know.
Yeah,
in the Blackfire Council.
You know, it doesn't, as far as I can tell, I'm actually looking at it here. It's not clear. You know, he describes them all as having the gold armbands.
Yeah.
Or the gold arm rings rather, but it's not clear. Is Lysono wearing a bunch of gold arm rings? Unclear. And you can imagine it both ways. You can imagine he's not because he's new, or you can imagine that that's part of why everyone leaves him alone.
Just part of his outfit because he's in the tent. Yeah, he's in the tent, right. Therefore he's got hella armbands.
Or they've given him, if you see him, you're like, who are you? But then you look at his armbands, it's like, well, for some reason, this guy, the spymaster, is wearing like 35 arm rings.
Yeah, he's in the club.
Okay, I get it. I don't know where you came from, but you've been somewhere working for the Golden Company all these years. Okay, that makes sense. You're a spy. So that could be. I hadn't thought of that. But so it's also, and this will come up later. It's also, if my theory is correct, it's also Lysono Maar. If this is the mummer, then it's him saying, "I'm not a eunuch." That this persona is not a eunuch. Now, whether the mummer really is a eunuch is a whole other question. But if Lysono is a persona of the mummer, this persona is not a eunuch, which seems to me like it's calling out to me all of this as the author, like giving you these questions, like, because if you start to clue in on this and go, oh, this could be Varys, you could think, oh, will we know when we hear that he's a eunuch? And will we know it's not true when we don't hear anyone talking about him as a eunuch? And this is that, you know what I mean? And so this is, to me, it's the author telling me, no, don't be looking for a eunuch here. That could be. Anyway, it's all speculation, but this is how it resolves out to me.
No, that's an interesting read of that scene for sure. I agree that if you're following that train of thought, where this is an announcement that there won't be any eunuchs traveling to Westeros, then I would say it would follow from there that we should look for Varys in someone that's not necessarily a eunuch, and that does tie into that old question of, is Varys a eunuch, which has come up a lot of times in theory community,
right?
Of the deep voice in the killing of Kevin Lannister is one of the ones I've actually seen against him being a eunuch, because it turns out that his voice actually has a ton of range and he's not restricted to only high tunes or anything like that. And I don't know enough about how that affects your voice or not, but it was an interesting proposition, the idea that maybe he's lying about all of it.
Absolutely. So I did say he was thinking about, maybe I was saving this for the coup de grace here, because it only comes up now in my outline, but like just before he enters the tent, Connington is thinking he's about Varys telling him he has to, like, be accused of stealing and then go pretend to die as a drunk somewhere. And he's remembering him saying, "We want no songs about the gallant exile," the eunuch had tittered in that mincing voice of his. "Those who die heroic deaths are long remembered, thieves and drunks and cravens soon forgotten." And he thinks, what does a eunuch know of a man's honor? Griff had gone along with the spider's scheme for the boy's sake, but that did not mean he liked it any better. Let me live long enough to see the boy sit the Iron Throne, and Varys will pay for that slight and so much more. Then we'll see who's soon forgotten. So you've got here, he hates Varys, wants to kill him. There's a reason for Varys not to show up as Varys.
Yeah.
He's invoking the idea of a eunuch of Varys being a eunuch for the first time in this chapter, which then later the word eunuch comes up later only out of the mouth of Lysono Maar, as just discussed. And then he's talking about Varys being forgotten. He's like, "Oh, you made me be forgotten as like a drunk and a thief. Well, we'll see who's forgotten when I kill you and bury you in history." He's talking about Varys being forgotten. And what Connington doesn't realize is that Varys has already forgotten himself. Like, he's gone. You're not going to find Varys. Now, you might sniff out the mummer, but like he wants to be forgotten. Character. Varys doesn't want anyone to ever talk about Varys ever again. He's not going to show up. Connington thinks he's going to show up as Varys, or they're going to meet him in Westeros, and he's going to go, "Hi, welcome. I'm here. Yeah. I'm here to give my service," and then he's going to kill him. But Connington's not that bright. And so I just think like him being forgotten, like he's talking about like, we'll see who's soon forgotten. And he walks into a tent and is looking right at him and doesn't see him.
That would be poetic irony at its finest. It would also be very fitting of the spider in general. I mean, I think Varys says people sing no songs of spiders or something like that. He does talk that way about the spider as a character, that the spider more or less, I would say, fits that mold of how he describes Connington being forgettable.
Yeah.
Or the old Connington being forgettable.
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, I floated this a few places, and what I usually get the main pushback I usually hear is timeline, and I don't see a problem with it. It's pretty straightforward to me. Varys is with Tyrion when Tyrion leaves King's Landing. So, and I think generally there's a general assumption that Varys is hanging around in King's Landing because he shows up there later, but I don't see any reason for that.
Where is he? Why is he there? That I think it'd be crazy was to stay. Problem for me. That was always a problem for me.
Yeah, like he needs to leave, and if he's going to disappear, I mean, if anything, if he had any plan to stay, it would have to be publicly, because like once he disappears, they're going to be looking for him, and if you'd have to assume they're going to get into the tunnels and so it just doesn't make sense. It makes more sense. He probably, baseline assumption, he leaves on the same boat Tyrion does. He just locks him in a barrel. And so then, Tyrion, then the ship goes to Essos. Eventually, he ends up with Griff and young Griff. Then Griff and young Griff meet Lysono Maar outside of Volantis at the Golden Company camp. Then the Golden Company crosses and lands in the Stormlands for Aegon's invasion.
And then he shows up and kills
Sometime
Kevin.
After that, then then Varys shows up and kills Kevin. So up to now, there's no, I mean, it's not like they left right. He could have left that day and got on a ship. Like once they put a date on the calendar, he could have gone and got a boat, or he could have left the same time they all did and went to King's Landing instead of the Stormlands. Whatever.
Yeah.
So
it's reasonable enough. Yeah.
The tighter timeline is him then getting down to the Rainwood to meet. But he has, by my read, minimum a week, 10 days from Pycelle and Kevin's death to get on a ship, go down to Griffin's Roost, and then leave Griffin's Roost with because Lysono Maar leaves Griffin's Roost with a company of Golden Company soldiers on the road for 4 days until they meet Ariane's party halfway between Mistwood and Griffin's Roost on that 8-day journey. He's got at least 7 to 10 days, if not more, to do that. To just make that sea passage from King's Landing to Griffin's Roost, which doesn't seem like a problem at all. So that's what I think. He gets on a boat, he goes to King's Landing, gets in the castle the way he left, and then he just
the time is tight. But what I would say about this is that George, and people always complain about this. I hear so many things back and forth, but my interpretation is that George plays fast and loose with timing to the extent that a story in a fiction book might require it. People often, I think, forget that like we're reading a fiction book that requires like certain characters to be certain places, and like I don't know. Even though George has a massive cast, the cast of like any real world politics and era similar to Ice and Fire, that's for fucking sure, would be so much more vast. And so I'm like, I feel like what actually supports this might be that the timing is, in my opinion, and I would say probably in the author's opinion, less relevant than does the character need to pull this off within a plausible timeline, as opposed to what would actually be required under maybe the not so best real world circumstances timeline. So like, I can see the time objection, but I can also see that George has established this character as a ridiculous master of both travel and disguise and deception, who can be in many more places at once than they should be, that can be listening and be creeping around all the various places. And he did establish, for good or for ill, that even Illyrio has the ability to basically seemingly cross over the narrow sea at his will to meet with, Varys and the Red Keep and stuff. Yeah. So no, I get the time objection. I would counter the time objection by saying it's not such a gap that it doesn't preclude simply George just being like, that's just the story. That's what we're getting. The character, he's here. There's enough time for it to happen. I don't know that the reader is expected to, or the story requires the reader to be that precise about time. Like certainly to a degree, but not like maybe to the nth that we as A Song of Ice and Fire investigatory community are, right?
No, I think to me, first of all, I mean, to be clear, I think the timing works. It's just like, it's still a week to 10 days. I think that's plenty of time to get there. What it isn't is like, it's not 2 months. So, but to arrive at that number, you have to do a lot of work, and it's confusing. The timeline of when these things happen is confusing. So you can look at it and go like, wait, aren't they arriving? Shouldn't he be meeting Ariane at around the same time that he's killing Kevin? And like broadly, yes, it is around the same time. So you might deflect that and go like, well, so that can't be it. But actually, no, he has like over a week at minimum to just take a boat between, not between, and then the ride. I mean, just for the boat ride between King's Landing and him landing at Griffin's Roost is more than a week. So it's one of these things. It's perfectly where it seems if you just look into it just without looking at people's various breakdowns of like timeline, but just look like just on general assumption, you'd go like, he seems to be in 2 places at once. But actually, when you break it down, it's close, but it's not too close. It's only going to take a matter of a few days.
It's close,
to sail,
but it fits within a tellable fiction story. It's close, but it fits within a tellable fiction story.
And if anything, I mean, the closeness throws you off, is what I'm saying, until you've sat and done like all the legwork on the timing, or somebody has. So, we do get some description. So, I love an idea of this where like Varys, the actor, does like dramatic weight loss in the 5 months between Tywin's death and showing up for Kevin. I love that. I think that's a great idea. But Kevin does describe him as, a half familiar voice replied. Far away, a half familiar voice replied. He stood in a pool of shadow by a bookcase, plump, pale faced, round shouldered, clutching a crossbow in powdered hands. Silk slippers swaddled his feet. So he does describe him as plump. This is another bit of pushback. Is people's mind's eye don't see Lysono Maar as plump. And there is, like I said, there is this short timing between Kevin's death. There's only there's maybe only a week or 10 days. And so, but the thing is, if you really parse the descriptions of Lysono Maar, there isn't actually anything about his body type.
That was going to be my question. My question was immediately going to be, is Lysono Maar's body type described? And then does this preclude Varys from plumpening his figure when he's Varys?
That's going to be my next.
But that's why I would be very curious about those questions.
It's plump, pale faced. So it's not saying he has a plump face, saying he's plump. So he could be wearing a pillow and his face. He's put on wherever he left his robe and slippers, and his powder. He and the crossbow. He's picked that up again, and maybe to help Kevin recognize him, because maybe he has grown out his hair, even under the wig, so he can eventually switch off the wig. Who knows? Maybe not. Maybe he keeps it because he's a consummate mummer. Maybe he keeps it shaved. But maybe he's added a little padding to he's kind of hastily thrown on a version of the Varys look that he could get together. Maybe it does. Kevin doesn't talk about his any hair or baldness. He could be wearing a hood. This is not mentioned, but he could have. Again, we're talking about a man of disguise here. He could have. I like the idea that he does the dramatic weight loss, but it seems like you kind of have to invent him putting in a pillow in his.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could be maybe not so dramatic. If we're thinking not like Mac from Always Sunny, but we're thinking half Mac from Always Sunny. The plumpness might have been original to him prior to leaving King's Landing. And then over that 6 months, some slimming has been done. And maybe he's wearing some padding to look a little more original. I mean, I could see it. Varys is a really good mummer. And I think that we do kind of forget how much you can do with costuming. It's pretty scary what you can do with costuming. So he's pretty, he had, in theory, I don't think it's out of his capability, right?
Yeah, you do have to ask, I think, what is the author trying to do here, which is by putting in, because if he just didn't say plump, you would be asking, could he have lost all this weight and be Lysono Maar? Because it doesn't mention anything. He usually is described as plump, but then it says, it's plump. And so now you have to add this other layer that he's really trying to hide from you that he's Lysono Maar, just like Varys is trying to hide his identity, present the facade, which, makes sense. It's possible, but it's you want it to be cleaner. But again, if he's trying to hide this from people, trying to get people to have this idea but dismiss it, the thing with me is I don't dismiss any of these ideas. I just get obsessed and start making them work. To
return to the appearance really fast. So the lips. I know we already talked about this one, but I do want to return to this only because I'd have to pull all the page numbers and I'd have to go through all the old George stories and stuff, which would take me a long time. But I'm almost positive I could compile a pretty decent case that George consistently associates fullness of lips with attractiveness and desirability of lip. So, based on that, if we can jump off from that, I would say that that Varys being a little plump to begin with might actually play in favor of having plump lips that like Lysono Maar's. If that's the way we're supposed to interpret it, which I would argue, if he's saying they're the envy of any whore, I think what he's referring to is what Martin describes as the classically attractive full lips,
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't know. That's a bit speculative, but I'm like, it would maybe lead us in that direction. Like, it would maybe lead us there. Like if Varys has a full face, full lips, that's a crossover,
Yeah.
Well, it's a bit speculative, but I would say it's a possibility for sure.
The last detail from the Kevin scene, Kevin's death, is the voice that you mentioned earlier. He says, Kevin's like, "What are you talking about? This boy, this isn't Aegon. He's dead. The babe is dead." And Varys says, "No." The eunuch's voice seemed deeper. He is here. Yep. And so deeper than Varys's normal tittering, mincing voice, which is interesting. Again, what it highlights is that, just highlighting again, that Varys is a mummer, that Varys is an actor. He puts on disguises, that Varys itself is a persona, not this real person, and does so in an interesting way, because now we've been going a while here, but I do have there is one more facet to this ever deepening Varys theory, if you have time.
Oh, no, go ahead. I actually had a few more questions too to kind of pitch in there if you have a little extra minute. I wanted to ask you if you believed Varys about being cut and telling Tyrion all that stuff.
Well, this is perfect. This is what we're going to get into in a way, because I think baseline assumption, the persona of Varys is a persona. And I think, therefore, the baseline assumption to me is that the details of that persona, the backstory of that persona, is not real. It doesn't mean he can't have been the mummer. The mummer spy can't actually be a eunuch who was mutilated and thus uses that one of the elements of his physical person in one or more of his personas. That makes perfect sense. You do that with every other part of you in some way, or not, but it's a choice. But just the fact that we know Varys is a persona makes me think this key bit about Varys, the thing that everybody knows about Varys, is not true.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah, it raises the question
to me, like, that's
of
just
how
baseline right there.
committed to RP is he?
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Well, could it serve a purpose?
It raises the question of how committed to RP is he? Like, is he a very committed role player? Do these characters that he plays have extensive backstories that he's created?
Oh boy, and, legends in these.
And if that was the case, then yeah, I wouldn't believe anything. I wouldn't believe anything about him being cut if that's the case. If these are really well, deeply thought out characters, then that's, who knows?
Do we think Varys is half-assing
it could be true, could not be true, could be true. The question is, can you trust anything he says? That's really, I think that he has reason to lie about almost everything. I mean, but to counter that, so the counterweight on it, George does seem to have truth to a degree, be able to be sussed out based on people's expressions and tonality. And I believe Tyrion cites him as having a very wall dropping, like he's dropped the mask for a minute kind of tone of voice and expression. So that made me wonder if the author is hinting and indicating. But the part I think is the truth within the lie. I think the truth in the lie pudding, more or less, is that he really does hate things like magic. I put magic in quotations because I think he really does hate Bloodraven. And I just think he's talking at something that's way beyond Tyrion's grasp. Because personally, I think he's just simply talking at a level that Tyrion doesn't understand.
Yeah. So, okay, where all this has been leading, all this talk of Varys and performance and everything else has been leading to what I think is a possibility. I mean, the more I looked into this, the more I became convinced, like, okay, yeah, Lysono Maar is Varys. Like, I now kind of believe that. Maybe when I started, I had this idea for forever, but when I researched it for these notes here, I was like, yeah, okay, like, I'm pretty convinced. Now, this is more speculative. It's an idea, but I kind of really like it for a lot of reasons, and that is that Lysono Maar is a trans man.
There we go. I think that this is probably feasible. Like, I don't know if Lysono would refer to themselves that way, but
well, no.
I think that yes, I think that this is how we could look at Lysono Maar.
Yeah. Now, of course, I'm talking about like what we might describe from our perspective as a trans man. Anytime talking about this kind of issue, like this is a fantasy faux medieval world, social construct that it is. Like gender is not was not for medieval Europeans strictly what it has been since like the Victorian era or the mid-century gay panic. Nor sexuality, nor obviously the same as it is now. Also this is a fantasy world, so like it's really up to the imagination of the author how these constructs would play out in this world, or in the life of the trans mummer. So I'm groping in the dark a bit here. So I hope everyone will bear with me. We're talking about what the author may be trying to do with a character whose, let's say, culturally prescribed performance of gender is like consciously non-desirable and in a very particular situation. So yeah, happy Pride, everybody. In fact, if you're watching this on YouTube, you should be getting an image, a new banner coming on the screen right now. And in fact, RAG, you can take a look at that in Discord right now.
Oh, there we go. That's cool. I like that. That's very fun.
The trans Blackfire banner waving before you right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, made by my friend and collaborator, the production designer Aaron OK, who does all the original banners for Moonman. Yeah, I mean, I am gonna earnestly try and convince us that the Mummer Spy is a trans man, and I'm totally serious. I think it's totally possible. But first, I want to thank Random Internet Guy for coming on and talking about all this with me. And as I said, like I really enjoyed, in particular, your series on Varys and Illyrio's plots and planning, a game for two players. I think it's called multi-parts. I encourage everyone to watch that. But like, tell us about what you got coming, and or what you've been doing more recently.
Well, so it's interesting you asked me that now. So I've actually decided to take a small RIG hiatus because I've been doing school and I've been doing my other channel. But I do have all my videos and theories up there. So if you want to check them out, I have all my stuff on the RIG channel, and then I was probably going to be bringing it back if I get the opportunity to, and I feel like it, probably around the time they do the Dunk and Egg thing, because Dunk and Egg was one of my favorite George R. R. Martin stories. And I am not necessarily wanting to make a bunch of commentary on the show content, but I would maybe like to do some videos on Dunk and Egg, or talk about Dunk and Egg, or do a reading of Dunk and Egg around the time the show comes out.
Right on.
To offer people kind of some Dunk and Egg stuff, since I'm sure the show will be different given HBO's track record. But there was one other thing I did want to slide in really quick here that is related to a video that I would like to put out one day in the future, some distant future at this point. And that's that I do think that Brendan Blackfish Tully is an ace. And that's
okay.
And so that's what I was going to put in the video. Is there's always this interesting discussion about Brendan Blackfish Tully's sexuality. And so I think that again, questions of gender, questions of sexuality are things that George thinks about. And so I think that people oftentimes, we already are talking about stuff that's kind of nearby. It's not the same thing, but it's nearby. Particularly in terms of exploration of literature and like kind of exploration of literature that George is interested in. So that's what I was going to say is I think that that's one that I'll do one day in the distant future, to talk about Brendan Blackfish Tully and then pitch that theory that actually people are guessing wrong about him, that he's the ace of fish instead,
Right on. Well, yeah, like I say, unless me and you have another idea, I'll link the Game for Two Players series.
Yeah,
at the
definitely.
End of this video.
Definitely check that out. I think it's still a very fun series, and I don't know if we'll ever get the ending book. So I think it's more fun than ever to speculate on really what the super long end game of, say, Bloodraven or Varys or somebody like that is going to be.
Totally. No, yeah. I mean, I'm all about it. A lot of really interesting stuff covered in that. That, like I said earlier, was helpful to me in thinking through all the questions in terms of the Battle of Wind theory and how that all plays out in my thinking. So and yeah, really well put together. Yeah, so everybody check that out. Okay, so for anyone who's thinking like, wait a minute, you're saying Varys, Lysono, Maar, not only the same person, but is a trans man? Is this even possible? Maybe that's a first level of skepticism. And since I actually want to convince you that this is not only possible, but really may be the case, like, let's, cover some groundwork here. So I guess this being the internet, if this sounds like woke to you, I don't know what to tell you. If again, more sympathetically,
Moon Man's gone woke.
Yeah, right. Yes. Moon Man and George R. Martin is saying George R. Martin has gone woke because sorry for all the problems in the world. It was me. I'm woke.
Oh, George R. Martin's been woke. That's why I think it's sometimes very weird about the fan community is I'm just like, have you actually read these books? George is a perv, I'll give you that much. He's a weirdo, and he's kind of got a bunch of latent misogyny laying around. Sure, I'll give you all that, but he's also woke as fuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think George bats pretty. I mean, he probably doesn't bat as hard left as I do, or something. But he's not your Fox News watching kind of guy. I don't think normally, right?
I don't think. No, I don't think so.
I don't think George R. Martin turns to Tucker Carlson for his coverage.
No, I don't think it's possible to really pin down, his politics just based on what he said or his writing. But I think about a baseline, whether it's clear to anyone listening or not, like A Song of Ice and Fire is a self-consciously feminist work that is part of the project he's engaged in. What that means is and how you interpret that is could go a lot of different ways, but I guess I can more sympathetically imagine someone listening wondering, well, is it likely that Martin is dealing with consciously dealing with trans issues in 1996? And I can see people maybe it's younger people, I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons your instinct might be to be skeptical of that. But partly because there are certain ways in which the long struggle for trans people to be able to live lives and also appear in media has become much more mainstream in the 21st century in the last 20 years, and also prompted a monstrous sort of backlash. And that can make it feel very kind of new in a way, but of course it isn't. Obviously, people bucking gender roles, gender norms, has always been around, and certainly in the 20th century, it was. It's true that for most of the 20th century, most portrayals of trans characters in media are as objects of scorn and humiliation, and
I definitely would agree with that one. If you watched Frasier in the 90s, Frasier's very funny, but they have a lot of very not great anti-trans humor.
Yeah, I mean that's basically if especially TV, because there's so many. You'd watch a movie and there's plenty of movies where it doesn't come up, but man, any show that is on for several episodes, eventually that comes up as a joke, and that this can all make it feel like, oh, why would he be thinking about this, or why would he be doing this? But and I just because I want to convince you that this is possible, I want to tell you that that's the wrong instinct. Obviously these are issues people are thinking about always and for a long time. And while representation of another thing to think about is we're not even talking about a main character here. We're actually talking about kind of a sinister villain. So if anything, that plays into certain tropes. It's also being done very subtly. But beyond that, this is sci-fi fantasy we're talking about, and it's literature. It's not television. It's genre, but I mean, again, it's sci-fi fantasy genre, not action adventure. stories, not like Western pulp fiction. These issues are coming up a lot. Ursula Le Guin, Left Hand of Darkness is like 69. But, and then even on TV in the 90s, before this is published, in sci-fi and fantasy, the most popular sci-fi and fantasy shows on TV, on Star Trek, you have them touching on these. And TNG in 1992, you have the episode
I was hoping
Outcast.
You were going to bring that up. I was hoping you were going to bring that up. I was literally waiting to talk about the Binar episode of Star Trek because George R. R. Martin actually has connections to the Star Trek writer community.
Oh, yeah, totally. I'm thinking of actually the episode Outcast, which deals with directly issues of sort of transgender liberation and socially prescribed gender presentation. Now, audiences at the time would correctly, and I think it's correct to read it today as the transgender and the gender element actually in general being a sort of sci-fi allegory for gay liberation, for gay rights, gay issues. And that's, I think, correct. But nonetheless, they are doing, and it's not like the writers aren't conscious of the fact that they are also doing a gender, a story about gender transition, gender choices, gender liberation, gender as a social construct. They're using that to talk about gay issues, issues of sexual liberation, and if you read it in the sort of trans issues today, it can seem kind of dated. Overall, I think it's a pretty great episode. I think in what it's trying to do, and ultimately kind of its political outtake on it. I mean, they try to do like it's kind of accurate in that they try to do like in the end they choose respectability politics of like, we're gonna stand loud and proud before the authorities of the state, the repression of the state, and what happens in the end is they get carted off and like lobotomized. Anyway, it's pretty grim.
Yeah.
But then in 1993, you have on Deep Space Nine, you have Jadzia Dax, which again, there's a lot more going on there. It's a sci-fi character with a lot of reasons for that premise, but it's not like the writers don't know they're touching on gender issues and a character who has transitioned genders, and it's not
Jadzia Dax is definitely a really prominent example of that. I would agree with you there. Like I was watching Deep Space Nine the other day, and I was just thinking about that. How I don't know. Dax is like, I don't know if you specifically would call Dax a trans character, but at the same time, they're a character who very often is dealing with some sort of gender issue, and other characters are also dealing with it around them too. Like, I like the episode with the Klingons because there's one Klingon, the very drunk one, I'm forgetting his name, Dahar, he's the Dahar master.
John Colicos is Kor.
Kor is like, Curzon, my old friend.
Right, Curzon the man.
Yeah, he's a Curzon, my old friend, and she's like, it's Jadzia now. Oh, Jadzia, my old friend. And I was like, he represents more or less what I would consider to be the appropriate behavior for like a trans ally or something like that in the modern sense.
Right.
Versus Koloth is saying, no, you're not actually the same person to me, because you have changed your genders, and then that opinion changes, but that it's initially a resistance of like, I can't look at you the same as a friend because your gender has changed, which is a very regressive kind of reactionary opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be correct if you said that. Well, in the case of Jadzia, yes, it's a character that has transitioned genders, has changed genders, and the relationships change for that reason. And you could say, well, that's a sci-fi premise that is talking about gender roles, and is using this sci-fi premise, like with the Klingons, not to talk about transgender issues so much as just gender roles. And you would be correct. That's all true. It's also true that the writers are definitely conscious that there is a transgender element, and it's easy to think that people have that especially a transgender community themselves have looked back on Jadzia Dax and as this important figure in TV, but that they're ascribing this thing backwards, and that's being ascribed onto her backwards, and that I might be doing that the same way here. And I would say that the intensity of that, I think, is true in the case of someone like Jadzia Dax. It is, most of the text of it is mostly about talking about, in those moments, is mostly about talking about gender roles, not about transgender concepts. But it is there. It is consciously in the writers. I mean, like I said, like these issues go back a long way. When you're talking about in popular culture, science fiction, fantasy writing, especially off television. I mean, Star Trek's ahead of its time, but like in novels, yeah.
So no, I agree with you wholeheartedly that I think that this is something that's been a major topic of discussion in sci-fi in particular. But I wanted to bring up also, there's a writer, and I'm not very familiar with this writer, but if you watch the YouTuber Sean does a whole dissection of a lot of their work in relation to this issue. It's Terry Pratchett. There was an argument about whether or not that they, in their time, were addressing trans issues as such. And their child was on the side of, yes, they were consciously addressing this. And then Sean, like I said, pulled a very particular book and some wording at the end, which it was part of his main evidence that, no, this author was very consciously trying to grapple with these things. And I think in different time periods, particularly kind of, back in the past portion of the 20th century, like late 20th century, mid 20th century, they're maybe not grappling with it perfectly. And then even in the 90s, like end 20th century, I would say, like, you look at some of the Star Treks, they're not grappling with it, I would say, necessarily in a way that we would say, oh, that's a very appropriate response today. But they're trying to get there. And they're trying to kind of suss out how to handle and talk about and think about things. And so, no, I think it's a major part of the sci-fi ethos, probably because of what you were saying too before, that this intersects a lot with gay issues and gay liberation issues. And I'm sure that anybody who's really, really associated with that movement and with gay rights and with LGBTQ, issues would bring up Marsha P. Johnson and say, trans issues and gay issues and liberation issues, these are all very linked and they're interconnected. So if you look at the community of sci-fi writers in general, they fall well within also, again, this influenced wheelhouse, or they are in fact themselves gay or trans. If you think of the Matrix writers, no, this is one I would totally agree with for a series of reasons that I think it's well reinforced in the literature and in the writing community.
And there's also just like, I mean, Judith Butler publishes in 1990, right? Gender Trouble, like that's an academic work, right? But it makes a huge impression. Like, it's a lot of people read it. A lot of cosmopolitan, worldly interested people, writers, read it. And what's that about? It's about thinking of gender not just as a social construct, but as a performance. And we have here in the case of the trans mummer spy. So you can either you can choose to agree that this is possible, or to the listeners out there, or you can be wrong, and from there we will move on. So okay, all right.
Yeah, I think the final framework there was the most convincing overall. The gender is performance, I think, is if George is exposed to that viewpoint, what a wonderfully poetic way of expressing that viewpoint.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So like I said, we talked about this. You brought this up. Baseline, Varys being a eunuch. My baseline assumption is that's part of the persona. Therefore, doesn't have to be literally true.
Yeah. So Varys the eunuch. Varys the eunuch is a eunuch, but the person behind the persona may not be.
Exactly. And that's key to, I think, understanding a lot about Varys is like, but that's maybe something we'll get into later, like maybe on the Patreon, about like how to think of him as telling the truth or lying.
Yeah.
So now let me pitch this story to you here. You have our mummer spy, our trans mummer spy, is born in such a way that his parents, I would have identified him in this world as a girl. Our trans mummer spy eventually doesn't want to be a girl, starts living as a boy, and I am probably going to continue to use the language of choice like that, which does not necessarily like encapsulate the trans experience, but what I'm talking about here is the social and political choices that this character might that the author might be talking about this character having to make, um, and how that the story is told through that, because that's and I think choice is an important way of talking about this. That is the politically relevant thing a lot of the time is your ability to make that choice. And so our would-be mummer spy comes to then feel that he is not or doesn't want to be a girl, and by whatever process comes to start living as a boy. Now, this could be at home, or it could be that he runs away, which is, at least partly in line with Varys's persona, the story he tells of his backstory. And some elements of that, of course, are true because Varys is a public figure and has been for some time. The farther back in time you go, the less sort of reliable any of that is. And what of it is legend and what of it is, so did he ever really run away? Was he ever really an orphan? How young? We don't know. I'm saying he was never mutilated, at least in the way he describes. But
well, you could take it as saying too that, like, if we're taking that as truly that these are characters, and then the character Varys could have been, mutilated. That's the character. That's what happened to them when they were young, And so it's like, but the actual person behind them has whatever background story they do.
Oh yeah. So for whatever reason, the mummer spy, the little boy, runs away or is out on his own in the streets, and when it comes time to develop the persona of Varys, for whatever reason, getting into to create this spymaster, this espionage business, however small that starts, it's possible that out there on the streets, even if the free cities, let's say, without getting into any evidence for or against, that the free cities are more, say, libertine than in
Westeros, yeah.
Westeros, maybe it's still like a fraught prospect, living as openly as a trans man. And add to that, maybe it's also fraught living as a trans man openly as and trying to be a spy master. Well, for a confluence of reasons, our little mummer spy, maybe he does travel with a mummer troop. Our little mummer spy, he develops the persona of Varys. He's a Lyseni orphan, Lyseni, because he's got the look. Maybe he really is from Lys. We don't know. And to simultaneously live as a man as he wants, but not live out as a trans man, he concocts the idea of presenting as a eunuch. And that allows him to do that. He can live as a man, but anyone questioning his gender presentation has the answer right there before they ever even meet him. And so it's not really even a question. He's a eunuch. So when you look at him, that's what you see. And any question of his gender, sex is sort of covered by that. That sort of answers anybody's questions, and the less they think about it, the better. But he gets those are two things he might want. Not to live out as a trans man because it may be impossible, dangerous, limiting in many ways, but to live as a man. And with the options available to him, maybe him personally, maybe it is in some ways for some people in this culture. I mean, certainly it would be possible to live out as a trans man, but to pass, rather, is what I'm saying. But for whatever reason, he personally doesn't think it is viable or safe to try and pass as a man, nor is it viable, advantageous, safe to live out as a trans man. So he comes up with the eunuch angle. Now, this character of Varys, the eunuch, becomes a successful spymaster and intelligence broker. Maybe also just the fact that he's doing this spy business and like the mystery of a eunuch or some cultural things, like maybe he thinks he comes upon that idea because it fits well with this, even, with the persona he concocts for these reasons of gender identity and his experience with it and how that fits into the world sort of socially, and with his idea of how to concoct this persona of the spy master. And so, but he's very successful at this. Like it's not it's incompatible with a lot of things, but it's not incompatible with the sort of loathsome thief and spy master who everyone's going to kind of be disgusted by anyway. It maybe it kind of fits for him as a character in many ways.
So I got a question.
Yeah.
My first question with all of this would be, does Illyrio ever know or find out, or is this something kept so close to the hilt that even Illyrio would be unaware and thus unable to betray or something like that? The true identity or something. I don't know.
That's a very
or is this something? Is this something that if you're close enough to I don't want to call them Varys necessarily, but to the character, if you're close enough to this individual, the
mummer spy,
the mummer spy, whatever form they're taking at the moment, do they share that level of secrecy with you, or are they always protective of it?
I suspect he plays it extremely close to the vest with everyone he meets. I think the only question is like, when did he meet Illyrio?
It was really early on, because I remember they
it was early. We don't know how early.
They schemed together to kind of get their little business venture off the ground. So it's I think Illyrio, at least according to Illyrio,
so we know that.
At least according to Illyrio, they schemed to kind of get their thing off the ground.
Yeah, and it's at a certain point that's a public relationship, and that people know about. So, but the question is, like, does he meet Illyrio as kind of he says, like they meet, or the two of them, between the two of them, say, like, I guess it's Illyrio talks about that part of the story. Like, do they meet in whichever city?
Yeah,
and do they go back farther? And we don't know. I can see it either way. I mean, either way, Illyrio is also extremely, is also an agent of the Golden Company. That might take more, convincing.
Oh, you don't have to convince me. Yeah, he's definitely an agent of the Golden Company.
He's obviously working with them. I would say like he is them. Like,
yeah, no, I agree with this. I tend to lean towards the young Griff is potentially Illyrio's son theme or theory. I kind of like that angle. Maybe that's not totally the way it can be, but I think that's one of the better theories around Illyrio's interest in young Griff.
Yeah. I obviously I mean that's very popular. I'll be revealing my thoughts on all that in, like I say, maybe part 6 of the Battle of Wind theory. So this persona of Varys, like he determines like this is a thing where he can pass as a eunuch, where maybe he can't or doesn't feel like he can ultimately long term. Of course, Varys, this is very complicated. Of course, Varys, the mummer spy does pass as a man routinely in his other personas, but which I know is a complication to this, but those are not lived in as long and maybe are not, he feels, put in as much danger. And also they're later creations, the ones we know about. He may have had other personas around the same time and before creating Varys, but Varys is very early
I would say to keep it in the kind of the wheelhouse of gender. I think that it's very shrewd when you wish to manipulate high ego, particularly male characters, to come from the eunuch perspective, right? Because that's like, I would say, like a high awareness of gender perceptions or gender assumptions or gender roles or whatever you want to call it, because Robert is always going to be less suspicious of Varys because the character Varys, in theory, has no penis. Right. That's strange. Most people probably don't think about that, but it's like, no, that's definitely something that's highly under the. It's highly under the surface. I know that sounds weird, but like if you think of like low, like maybe subconscious might be the one way of putting it, like motivating factors. Varys being a eunuch, playing that particular angle actually helps with other people's feelings about themselves and gender role. Allows you to manipulate Robert because he feels like he's this big, strong man, and of course, no little, no dicked man could ever manipulate Robert.
Right. And what's great about that too is, like, you could say, well, like, why doesn't he just why doesn't he create a woman persona then? And again, that aside from all the social and political implications of that, whereas that also might be difficult to achieve this position as, freelance Free City spymaster. Maybe not, but maybe not the way he wants to do it. But even if that is an option he considers, he doesn't want. What's great about it as a story about gender identity and specifically about the trans experience is maybe ultimately part of how he comes to that choice between, well, I could just, this persona could be a woman, or what about this eunuch angle, is he doesn't want to. He just fucking doesn't want to present as a woman. And so he doesn't. And so that's what this is the compromise, if you want, that he comes up with for this persona. I think that there's something powerful about that. So now, that's just a story about, well, what do we make of Varys as a eunuch once you realize, like, it's all a persona? And that kind of plays on its own. Like, oh, Varys is a trans man. Is there a ton to back it up? No, it's a story about, like, what the origin and function of his sort of gender bending persona is. That he's a trans man, and that's what explains all this. Now, enter Lysono Maar. And specifically, like, he's already entered the chat. We've talked about him being the Mummer spy through reading through John Connington's perspective of meeting him. But later he meets Arianne, as we mentioned, and now I'm gonna read from that exchange. Arianne's company was met by a column of sellswords down from Griffin's Roost and led by the most exotic creature that the princess had ever laid her eyes on, with painted fingernails and gemstones sparkling in his ears. Lysono Maar spoke the common tongue very well. I have the honor to be the eyes and ears of the Golden Company, Princess. And she says, you look, she hesitated. Like a woman, he laughed. That I am not. Like a Targaryen, Arianne insisted. His eyes were a pale lilac, his hair a waterfall of white and gold. All the same, something about him made her skin crawl. Was this what Viserys looked like? She found herself wondering. If so, perhaps it is a good thing he's dead. I am flattered. The women of House Targaryen are said to be without peer in all the world. And the men of House Targaryen? That's Arianne. Oh, even prettier. Though if truth be told, I've only seen the one. So once again, we have, in John Connington's perspective, when he meets with the Golden Company captains, he clocks Lysono at first as a woman. And then sort of looks closer and realizes, oh, this is a man. He reads his a gender identity presentation as a man who is presenting with some feminine looks or accoutrement, his gender is bending one way or the other. But that's how he clocks him. Now, here, we don't really know what she hesitates when she says, "You look." And there's this question of, was she really thinking like a Targaryen? Maybe, probably. But either way, almost defensively, he says, "Like a woman," he laughed. "That I am not." So he knows, he's aware, he's presenting in with a certain level of femininity here, and is defensive in a way that I think does kind of describe the trans experience. If this is a trans man being confronted by someone who is a little taken back by his appearance, he's jumping to a conclusion, right or wrong. "Oh, you've clocked me as a woman." And then both defensively, but also assertively and confidently saying, "I'm not." And this to me rings of the trans experience, because he's saying, doesn't matter how you've clocked me or what I'm signaling here, even, I'm not a woman. It's a assertion of gender identity. And so that is something that really jumped out at me. Now, of course, he's described, like John Connington, as having, as being a bit flamboyant. And, yeah, maybe this is just a guy who's, maybe he's gay, maybe not, maybe he's just queenie. He's just kind of flaming. Maybe he just brings in more or less sometimes elements of feminine presentation, painting his nails. All of this is possible.
It does seem defensive. I will definitely say that does come across a little bit, or defensive is the wrong word, preemptive.
Yeah.
Like trying to head someone off kind of at the conversational pass. And I think that goes another way too, which is towards just simply trying to, I would say, like, direct one towards the intended identity, like don't look over there, look over here,
Mm-hmm.
So you could argue that one way and be like, oh, they're just trying to, they don't want they're just trying to assert that, don't call me one thing, call me the other thing. But no, I think it is awfully preemptive, because, like, let's say, yeah, you're Lysono, Maar, you just like looking really super femme. Like, I don't know why you'd even say one thing one way or another. It wasn't something that was necessarily kind of on your mind, I guess you could say, if you're trying to argue the psychology side of it. Maybe the character has, it's something they're conscious of, and so they're reacting to a perception that only exists on their side. And then Ariadne corrects and says, "Actually, I meant that you looked like, what I imagined Viserys looked like," or whatever,
Or she's wondering.
Yeah.
So we have, these possibilities. Like, he's okay. Again, yeah, he could just be a cis man who's just kind of a fabulous queen. Maybe he has sex with men, maybe he doesn't. These are all, gay is a social construct that maybe doesn't apply in this world exactly the way we would think of it. Like, none of this does. But we're really just trying to picture, like, try to get in the psychology here of, the other possibility, which is that he's what we would think of as a trans man in a way, or that someone in our world might choose to identify as a trans man specifically. But more than that, there's two possibilities within this. So one of the possibilities is that he's a trans man in the way that I've described, and that his persona, you could ask the question, well, wait a minute, why is he so fabulous? Like, if he's a trans man, why is he have these bits of feminine presentation, right? And one possibility is it serves the same purpose in this persona as the eunuch element serves for Varys, which is as a kind of distraction. It throws you off. You clock him as a woman at first, but then, like John Connington did, you see, okay, wait, actually, he's presenting as a man with a handful of feminine elements, and thus that's what I saw that made me clock him as a woman. And so, but you see foundationally he's presenting as a man. And so you go, okay, he's just a fabulous man. And so this allows you to, you change. Connington immediately changes his mind. Oh no, this is a man who's just effeminate. And like with the eunuch character, you don't then ask further about his sex. You don't think next, like, wait, what genitals does this man have? As a a person in this world wondering about these things. This doesn't occur to you because it's like a distraction. It just sort of it smooths over whatever is about his physicality that also makes you clock him as a woman. The way you might, maybe if you looked at Varys, you might, and you didn't know who he was, you might at first clock him like, wait, is that a man or a woman? I'm a little confused. But you already know he's a eunuch, and that just ends that for you. Like, that must be why eunuchs are like that or something. It just, whether it even makes sense, it answers those questions for you. I mean, does that make sense? Like, that as sort of distraction to pass as a man who is kind of effeminate, that it's about passing as a man, but being closeted as trans.
Yeah, no, and I think it fits within the previous kind of framework that you established with Varys too, because it's a similar situation, different approach, similar situation.
Yeah.
You want to be perceived as a certain gender, so you pick someone that people are maybe not going to necessarily scrutinize and try to analyze. Well, are you really that gender? But this is kind of a different approach to that, and so I would say, I'm not saying that's the same thing I'm saying, but it fits in that framework. So no, I definitely get what you're arguing there.
Yeah. So softening your gender presentation in one way or another, so that not to raise other questions.
Might be easier to pass as an effeminate man than to try to pass as a
as really
as
butch.
Strong bell wasp.
yeah, exactly. Yes. Easier to pass as a eunuch, or for this particular person, or a flaming effeminate,
as the lead singer of Poison. No.
Yeah.
I can't even remember what the lead singer of Poison looked like, but I was just the glam rock look. The glam rock look. Big hair, makeup,
There's another possibility. Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's glam for sure. I mean, this is fantasy, like everyone's a little glam. He's like really frontman.
Frontman to a band is definitely what I see. Like, that's how I imagine Lysono Maar is, like frontman to a band,
Yeah. So I want to suggest another possibility that, if this is the case, I think would come up more, and become more evident somehow in The Winds of Winter. And that's that, and I think this is much more interesting. And that's that Lysono is a trans man who, after having, as the mummer spy, after living so long as a eunuch, so living as a man, passing as a man, but as a eunuch, and even for periods of less scrutiny without people really knowing him personally, passing as other men, but passing as men, not as trans, in the closet as trans, that after living like that so long, Lysono, the mummer spy, has created a new persona to really live his best life as something like how he would want to live. And the first instinct might be to say, oh, well, what he really would want more than anything else is to pass as a man, like regularly, consistently. And yeah, that might be some people's desire. But it may also be that a sort of progressive, idealistic theorist of power and politics, Varys, Mummer Spy, might actually deep down be more interested in living a life out as a trans man in a way that is more identifiable to, like, us today. So he's had to pass as a man, an effeminate eunuch, or briefly as more butch men, but with a heavy characterization, putting on a butch voice and stinking, and like with a swagger and all this stuff. And that's not who he is.
Yeah.
But maybe now he believes, and maybe he is able to be truly liberated. He's marching in Aegon's army, the Blackfire Free Brotherhood of the Golden Company, where meritocracy is everything, and perhaps there's an openness to shifting gender identity and a possibility that might even in part motivate someone like Varys to believe in a better future for Westeros as a result of this revolution. Think of Varys's very idealistic speech to Kevin at the end of Dance with Dragons.
Yeah.
This is for the children. This, Aegon's been raised in these ways. He doesn't talk about specific kinds of liberation, but it's clear he's talking about some kind of revolution where things can be different, things can change in Westeros because of who they're going to put at the top and because of what that's going to bring. And when you think about what the Blackfires represent, it is change. It's throwing away certain moral and feudal customs, like the importance of bastardy and the importance of, like, the rules of inheritance, throwing this away in favor of something else, meritocracy, like of having like a series of good emperors, in the Roman sense, like, where you pick from who's the best, you cultivate people, and you pick the best administrators, and like, these are, he's in some way, he's some kind of proto-liberal, and thus you can imagine a lot of other things could go with that. And I can imagine that this is a character, the Mummer spy, who now at the head, as one of the officers of the new Aegon imperium, he believes that this culture of the Golden Company is going to be coming to Westeros, and he's going to be partially in charge of it anyway. And so now he can live as he would want to. He can create a persona that's him. And that is not living closeted as a man. And that's not living closeted as a man. It's not even passing completely, strictly as a man without anyone questioning it. It's living as he wants to live, which, as a man, he wants to say, no, I'm a man. It doesn't matter what you see here. I present as I want, which is as a fabulous man. And when you question it, I get to say, nope, you thought I was a woman? You're wrong. And end of story. And that would make this a story of trans liberation, where these choices are available to him, and maybe he thinks will be available to more people. And that's part of his personal motivation. So he, because it's a story of someone not just being liberated from gender, the social construct of gender as it is attached to sex, to, the way he was identified at birth, but also from strict gender performance altogether. And he gets to perform gender exactly in the fluid way that he feels most comfortable and wants to, and that fits his vibe, but also assert a gender identity that he is, well, he doesn't even say a man, he says not a woman. I mean, maybe, he could have any kind of gender identity, but his presentation gets to be what it is, and you don't get to tell him otherwise because this is a new world.
Well, I think that's very interesting. I like that outlook. At least I think it kind of is a very. I don't necessarily know that I believe that Varys, when he's talking to Kevin, has an actual positive utopian outlook for things. But I think it does fit kind of into the liberation stories within A Song of Ice and Fire, even if he's lying a bit about, Aegon being this amazing king or whatever. But no, I think that would fit very well.
We should talk more about that on the Patreon.
Yeah, we can. I think we can. That fits very well into what you constructed, though, just for the character in general. Like, if that character is living out a trans life, I think that's definitely when they come in, when their movement comes into their power, is when they come into greater authority to be able to present themselves how they want. So I think that all tracks pretty well.
Yeah. He goes from having to live in the closet, getting a little bit of what he wants, to live as a man, but with these heavy caveats, to now the new order has arrived. I get to be who I am, and the Golden Company's cool with that because that's the vibe over there. I mean, they're clearly cool with his presentation. Like he's the spymaster of the Golden Company, and that isn't his presentation. Even if he's a cis man, is not bothering anybody. That's not causing him any problems. So whereas it might in the court in Westeros as it has been. So. What do you think? Varys is dead. Varys is Lysono Maar. They're both a trans man. What do you think, Ian?
I can get with it, and I think it would be one of the more spicy and interesting reveals if we ever actually get that Varys chapter.
Yeah. I mean, I can see. Well, let's talk about more about how that would be revealed. Also, like in how this would be more explored. Anyway,
that's what I'm really curious about. I want to know what you think the reveal would be like. I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, I think there are possibilities. But I think we should wrap it up there for now. Well, like I say, we're gonna jump to the Patreon here. If this was your first Moonman video, happy Pride, everybody. But please watch the Battle of Wind videos next. Those will be coming on the screen. They're a bit different. They're not like this. They're much more involved. It's not just two guys talking, and it's a major theory about a theory of everything about the politics of Ice and Fire. It's insane that I think that after 13 years after A Dance with Dragons and billions of posts and hundreds of thousands of videos, that I've cracked something new open here that rewrites the entire sort of plot and meaning of everything. But that's where I find myself. So go watch the Battle of Wind videos. It all starts with Stannis, but then we get Mance, Littlefinger's coming next. I'm working on that now. Making sense of these characters beyond things like, well, they're just fanatics or they're just desperate or it's just chaos. I know it seems unlikely, but you can be the judge. That's the real Moon Man. It's on a different channel, but again, there'll be a link. So that's what you should be watching next. You go right into that. If you have seen that, then go right over to RIG's channel. If you haven't checked out his Game for Two Players series, that link will be up here. And then for the patrons, we're going to pick up this conversation. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the implications of these theories. Talk a little bit about Varys, what is his political outlook? When is he lying or telling the truth? And then, something I haven't talked about much is the Battle of Wind theory. Of course, this is what's been I put out so far is a whirlwind of stuff that maybe breezes past some big questions. Because I'm getting a lot of information out there very quickly. So I think Random Internet Guy might have some questions to ask about that. And so for the first time, I'll be kind of talking about in more depth about the Battle of Wind. I'm not going to reveal all, but there's some things that I've touched on that we can now talk about, and maybe I can answer a question about stuff I haven't talked about. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, everybody.